You know, for almost 3,000 years, there's been one name that's kind of set the standard for what it means to be a hero on a massive, world-changing journey. And that name? It's Odysseus. We've all heard about the hero's journey, right? The call to adventure, all the crazy trials, the big triumphant return. It's a formula we see everywhere. But what if I told you that entire blueprint was basically laid out by one incredibly complicated guy from a tiny little island called Ithaca?
Okay, but here's the kicker, right from the start. Was this guy a brilliant hero, or was he a manipulative, scheming villain? And what's wild is that two of the greatest ancient civilizations on Earth looked at the exact same person and came to completely opposite conclusions. For the Greeks, he was the smartest guy in the room. For the Romans, he was a two-faced liar. So, what's the real story?
To figure that out, we've got to go back to the beginning. Odysseus was the king of Ithaca. He was a husband to his super-loyal wife Penelope and a dad to his little boy Telemachus. But more than any of that, he was known for one thing: his mind.
The ancient Greeks actually had this perfect word for him, polytropos. It literally means the man of many turns. Now that's not just about his long, winding trip home. It's about his mind. It was complex, it was tricky, it was always twisting and turning, scheming its way out of trouble. So you gotta understand his greatest weapon was never a sword, it was his brain.
And so what's the very first thing he does when he gets the call to go fight the Trojan War? He uses that brilliant mind to try and dodge the draft. He'd been warned by an oracle, you see, that if he went to Troy, he wouldn't be coming back for a very, very long time.
And his plan to get out of it just shows you how crafty he was. He pretended he'd gone completely insane. He hooked up a donkey and an ox to his plow, which of course can't walk together, and started planting salt in his fields instead of seeds. It was a genius act, really. But it all fell apart when one of the guys trying to recruit him put his infant son right in the path of the plow. Odysseus had to swerve to save him, which proved he was sane. His fate was sealed. He was off to war.
All right, so since he couldn't get out of the war, Odysseus decided he was going to use his brain to win it. And on the battlefields of Troy, surrounded by these legendary warriors like Achilles and Ajax, Odysseus showed everyone that sometimes brains are a heck of a lot more powerful than brawn.
And this, of course, leads to his absolute masterpiece. After 10 long years of a bloody, going-nowhere war, Odysseus comes up with the ultimate con, the Trojan horse. It was just a brilliant final move. He said, let's build a giant wooden horse as a gift. Then he hid all his best soldiers inside and got the rest of the Greek army to pretend to sail away. The Trojans thought they'd won and dragged their own destruction right inside their city walls.
So, the war was over. But for Odysseus, that oracle's prophecy was just getting started. His journey home should have taken a few weeks. Instead, it turned into a 10-year nightmare, a battle for survival against angry gods, terrifying monsters, and his own sense of hopelessness.
10 years. Think about that. 10 years fighting a war, and then another 10 years just trying to get home. That's 20 years away from his family, from his kingdom. An entire generation of his life just gone.
This journey is packed with some of the most famous stories in all of mythology. And I've got to say, my favorite is his run-in with the Cyclops Polyphemus. When the monster asks for his name, Odysseus just says, nobody. So later, after he blinds the giant to escape, the Cyclops runs out screaming to his brothers for help, yelling this exact line. It's just absolutely brilliant.
And man, the challenges just kept on coming. He had to outsmart the witch Circe after she turned his crew into pigs. He was the only man ever to hear the deadly song of the sirens and actually live to tell the tale. He had to sail his ship between a six-headed sea monster and a giant whirlpool that ate ships for breakfast. He even had to survive being held captive for 7 years by the goddess Calypso, who wanted him as her lover.
So, finally, after 20 years, Odysseus washes up on the shores of Ithaca. But the fight, oh, it's far from over. While he was gone, his palace was completely overrun with these arrogant guys, these suitors, all trying to force his wife Penelope to marry one of them so they could steal his kingdom.
And in classic Odysseus fashion, he doesn't just storm the front gate. No, he uses his mind. The goddess Athena helps him disguise himself as a poor old beggar, so he can sneak in, figure out what's been going on, and see who's still on his side.
The whole thing comes to a head when Penelope, who's just as clever as he is, comes up with a challenge. She says she'll marry whichever suitor can string her husband's powerful old bow. Well, these guys are all so full of themselves, but one by one they try and fail. They can't even bend it. Then the old beggar steps up, and with no effort at all, he strings the bow and fires a perfect shot.
And in that moment, the disguise is gone. It's an absolute bloodbath. Odysseus and his son Telemachus, who's now a grown man, slaughter every single one of the suitors. It's brutal, for sure, but it's the moment the king finally takes back his home, his family, and his throne.
But the story doesn't really end there. The tale of Odysseus is so powerful, it's been retold and re-argued for thousands of years. His whole character just keeps shifting, depending on who's telling the story and when.
And this is where his story gets really fascinating, because it becomes a mirror for history. The Greeks, they valued cleverness and survival, so to them, he was a hero. But the Romans, who believed they were descendants of the Trojans, well, they saw the guy who tricked and destroyed their ancestors. To them, his cleverness was just cruelty. Then you jump ahead to the Middle Ages, and Dante puts him deep in hell. Why? Well, for a devout Christian like Dante, all that cleverness wasn't for God, it was for himself. It was fraud. It was a sin. Then, in the 20th century, James Joyce looks at him and sees a totally modern guy, flawed, wandering, just trying to get through a single complicated day. Every single era remakes Odysseus in its own image.
So that brings us right back to that first question, but with a whole lot more to think about. See, Odysseus isn't just some character in a book, he's a question we keep asking ourselves. Is it better to be strong or smart? When does being cunning cross the line into being deceitful? And what does it really, truly mean to find your way home? The man of many turns is still the man of many answers, and the answer you get really just depends on who you are. So I'll ask you, what's your verdict?